The first electric vehicle was created back in 1832, but cheap and abundant fuel meant the internal combustion engine dominated car manufacturing throughout the 20th century. Now we've turned a full circle. The cost of fossil fuels to the environment has resurrected that 200-year-old invention to the point where it's now our most important transport transition. I'm joined now by Peter NEWMAN, Professor of Sustainability at Curtin University. Professor, welcome. So good to have you with us today.
G'day.
G'day to you too. Now, EVs are of course, a major part of the fight against climate change. How far away are we right now, today, from having more of them on the road than petrol-powered vehicles?
Well, there are some countries in the world where 80% of the market are now electric vehicles. They're rapidly growing in places like China, where they're replacing their oil very quickly. And we've now got electric tuk-tuks in India and Thailand. We've got electric boaters in Africa. We've got electric buses and electric trains everywhere. So it is taking off. It's growing at about 17% a year. And by the next 5-year period, I think you'll find that there will be no more petrol and diesel cars and trucks on the market.
You mentioned what's happening across, places in Asia and in Africa and other parts of the world. With electric tuk-tuks, that's one thing, but in so many of these countries, specifically in the Asian region, there is, roads which are absolutely dominated by motorbikes. Is that transfer, from electric, from the internal combustion engine, from oil, from gas, into electrics going to happen that quickly?
Yes, it is, and you'll find it quite dramatic because they're quite easy to fit into the system and they are so easy to repower. In China now you can get little plug-ins at all the shops for the electric motorbikes. So the two-seaters are taking over very quickly, and and they're cheap. They are very cheap to run, of course, and if you've got PV on the rooftop, it's free.
So when are we going to see price equal price, sort of one for one? You transfer in your gas or your oil or your petrol-powered vehicle and you come out with an electric vehicle?
There are some data that suggests it's already there if you consider the ongoing costs. It will pay for itself very quickly. It's definitely more expensive up front, and that upfront cost is coming down very rapidly as the battery costs come down. So they're all proceeding in the same direction, so that the upfront cost is likely to be equivalent by 2025, certainly, and even 2023 is being talked about.
Wow, so by next year, we're likely to have an equivalent cost. One of the issues, of course, is batteries. We're seeing a lot of information when it comes to batteries, the weight of batteries, the size of batteries, all of those sort of things when we're talking about this type of transition. How much further do we need to go to make this sustainable, to make it scalable, given the resource situation out there, where, of course, there is a finite supply?
Well, already, if you have an electric vehicle, you'll find it is lighter than a petrol or diesel powered vehicle because it doesn't have the great big heavy engine in it. All you've got is a battery. It's both the power source and the fuel source, if you like. So you don't need a lot of the gear and there are very few moving parts, so it doesn't break down very easily. It's a much better vehicle. And the lightness of the batteries is the magic of the lithium-ion battery. It is both very powerful but also very light. And that is why we now have electric vehicles rather than in 1832 when they only had lead-acid batteries and so on to use.
We really have come a full circle when we look back at what they were doing in 1832. What do you see as the biggest issue, with this transition as we move? And of course, as we've just talked about, innovation has sped up, and it certainly has sped up during the COVID-19 pandemic. What are the issues that we could well face in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, it's all about servicing. That means recharge points and being able to service the electric vehicle rather than a petrol or diesel one. None of this is difficult. There are already market forces at play that are enabling recharge, high speed and low speed, all over the place. And as soon as these vehicles are out on the road, you'll find all kinds of clever people are setting up businesses to help service them and make them and enable them. So the key thing for me is that these big batteries on vehicles can become part of the grid in servicing it, enabling it, so you can get money back by plugging your vehicle in when you're not using it, and it helps the grid. Now, that all hasn't been worked out properly yet. So that's the next big challenge for the grid operators, to work out how electric vehicles fit into this. But the market is going bananas, and we'll have no problems about having lots of them out there all ready for the utilities to use.
Where do hydrogen vehicles fit into this, Professor? You know, obviously they are behind where we are at in terms of innovation with electric vehicles, but how does this fit into the mix going forward?
I don't see much role for hydrogen going forward. It's basically lost the race, and it's pretty obvious why. You need to not just have a hydrogen vehicle that's tootling down the road. You've also got to be able to refuel it. And that hydrogen needs to be transported and stored there. And that's the hard part. We already have an electric grid you can plug into. So why not use that when you've got a cheaper option already? So the hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are 3 times the price, and they're likely to stay there, and they are not fitting into a whole new system because the system is too expensive and too difficult to provide. It used to be thought that the big trucks and big freight trains and so on would need to be hydrogen fuel cells, but not. Now the lithium-ion batteries are all being purchased by the big mining companies for their big trucks and their big trains. These are working and they're cheap, so why do it? It's the hydrogen fuels will be needed in industry, and they'll be needed for ships and planes, but not on land transport.
So how do you see this playing out in the corporate world, Professor, when it comes to the big truck manufacturers, the big vehicle manufacturers out there at the moment? I mean, you know, you only have to look at a company like Tesla to see that was a new company. That isn't sort of a reinvigoration or a reinvention of a company like Toyota. What happens in the corporate world?
Yes, it's been a very rapid change. Tesla is now 3 times the value of Ford and General Motors. I mean, this is extraordinary change. The corporate world are catching on very quickly. It's if you aren't into lithium-ion battery-based vehicles, you're going to miss the boat. And a few of the companies, including big ones like Toyota, were pushing for the hydrogen fuel cell option more than the electric one. They're now really shifting and going into the LIB vehicles, and that's now taking off. So I don't see that the corporate world are going to miss out on this, but if they continue to push for either keeping petrol and diesel or going for hydrogen, they're likely to not do very well into the future. So that's the market as it's emerged very quickly in the last couple of years.
All right. Professor, great to have you with us today. We appreciate your time and, of course, your expertise. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Peter NEWMAN with us there, Professor of Sustainability at Curtin University.